I'm your host, Donna Cates, and each week we'll dive into powerful stories, expert strategies, and practical tools to help you take charge of your financial future. Whether you're planning for retirement, navigating a divorce, or simply looking to build your wealth with confidence, this is your space to grow, learn, and thrive. Let's get started with today's podcast. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to have you here today, and I'm especially excited to introduce you to Elizabeth McCalley. She is actually the owner of Start Stack, and I'm going to let Elizabeth tell you all about that business. But Elizabeth, if you could start by giving us a 90-second overview of what you do and why you got into it.
Yeah, hi Donna. Thanks so much. So Start Stack's an interesting business. We are in this part of the startup industry. I call it idea market fit. And so this is the earliest stage of the company formation of business. So we are sit right at the center of business strategy, product management, and go to market. And our entire mission is to reduce the failure rate of startups. So how we got here is notice that when I was starting a business is ridiculously hard for lots of reasons, particularly if you're a software company and well, really any company for that matter. And started to do some research, and we accidentally did a year of work in 3 months with two people and 30 AIs. And we thought to ourselves, can we encode startup? And so this is the mission that we've been on to take the 30 professionals that startups can't afford to hire and put them in the box. And so we are essentially bringing deep expertise to the smallest companies in the world. So I like to say we are in the B2 little b business, the baby bees of business. That's what we do.
I love the B to little b because that's the thing is that, and until somebody starts off on their own and tries to do all the things, wearing all the hats, you don't
Hmm.
realize how much expertise you need and
Hmm.
how we've only got so much time ourselves. So, what I've heard is you've basically packaged all of the different resources that somebody that's thinking about bringing a business into fruition, you've packaged that for us so that all we have to do is kind of come plug and play.
Well, almost.
Almost.
And so yeah, we've been on this journey for a couple years now, and we are in the process of packaging in this platform. And what I've been doing for the last year is trying to break my AIs. So we do strategic business planning for very small companies in the breadth and scope that you need to do strategic business planning that quite often is skipped. We can talk about why that skipped later, but essentially um, we have built the knowledge and the capability to be able to help people this way. And we're now putting that into a self-service experience and a platform. So we're not quite, I'm not going to call it done, but we're well on our way.
Right. And if you're like most businesses, you're going to be evolving anyway. So the done never arrives.
It's never done.
That's right. Awesome. Well, tell me, especially using AI, it's like front of mind for everybody right now.
Hmm.
But tell me, what is the biggest problem that you see in this industry that you're creating, and how are you working to solve that?
In the startup industry, I love to
Mhm.
pick on it. Um, the biggest issue that I see and observe, and particularly if our research, we do a lot of research and analyst work as well on our way. That's just part of who we are as a company, our fabric. And the access to entrepreneurship programs is incredibly limited. 1 to 3% of entrepreneurs are accepted into startup programs, and the reality is, with more people becoming entrepreneurs, we've got this wave of structural unemployment that's coming, and is some part, here, many people making choices to graduate from corporate and go and build their own seat, build their own table, right? We've talked about that a little bit.
Mhm.
And so people, when they take that leap of faith, um, finding the resources they need to support them in appropriate ways is can be really hard. So there's lots of resources that are available to people, nonprofit, local community type of arrangements, all the way up to very exclusive type of accelerator programs. Often the trade-off is, equity for knowledge, but you know, all of these programs, the thing that's common is they're very human capital intensive programs. They're very expensive to operate. They're very limited in the resources that they can offer. And most importantly, most of these accelerator programs want companies that already have product, that already have traction. And so there's the gap in the market that we want to fill. We want to serve a market that nobody wants anyway. We are top of funnel for entrepreneurship, and we are, in the idea space and want to democratize access to the depth of knowledge that people need to start up.
Okay, fascinating. So using words there like not having a product
Mm-hmm.
already ready to go,
Mm-hmm.
and that literally being the gap as we're starting from that. It's an idea
Mm-hmm.
and getting it out there. Oh,
That's right.
fascinating.
Because people have lots of great ideas, but having a great idea and having an idea be able to be a business and make money and have it to be sustainable. And people, might have tons and tons of domain knowledge in an area. The domain experts are, the new leaders, not the new leaders, always been leaders in business, but the domain knowledge is critically important to be able to, come up with these ideas that are solving real problems. And solving a problem is, the top reason companies fail. The number one is lack of product market fit. And that's because sometimes people bring products to market that nobody wants and nobody needs. It's not solving a problem that's a big enough problem, or a problem that, is niche enough where someone's going to pay money for that. And so that's the issue, is really trying to take what's the idea and how do you implement the idea, flesh out the blind spots, understand the business models, the pricing, the packaging, the competition, the competitive market analysis, the financial models, all the things that go with that. That's the business that we're in.
Wow. And I'm curious to know how many times you're working with people that come to you and have these great ideas, and you just have to say, it's not there yet.
Well, you make a good point, because commercialization of ideas, they can take on a number of different forms. So ideas can become licensable. Ideas can be, become whole companies. And the licensing, and commercializing through licensure is very different than I should build a whole company around this idea. So there's two things
Mm,
there. And that's often the space that universities wrestle with in their commercialization innovation programs is, these, ideas go through a pipeline. Um, Often there's intellectual property involved, those kinds of things. And, at one point, if there's a market need, a market size, that's large enough, they have to make a decision at some point, is this intellectual property something that we want to, license to another party as the commercialization path, or is this capability something that, we can build a company around? The other point you bring up is being too early in the market is the same thing as missing the market. And several times in my career, actually, I've brought capabilities to market that were too early. The metaverse is not new. The metaverse has been around for about almost 20 years. And people don't, realize that a lot of the things that are becoming mainstream, that become visible to people and consumers, at scale, those ideas have been in incubation, in testing, and various types of uh, commercialization phases for decades sometimes. So, finding your way through the timing, um, the idea, who the customer is, the economic buyer of that idea, all of those things have to come into play. And it is, there's a bit of science, there's a bit of magic, there's a bit of luck. There's a lot of strategy that goes into it. And so these are the kinds of things that we really like to wrestle with. And this is why AI is so brilliant right now in this moment, is we get to push on the ideas, we get to find the blind spots, we get to do deeper analysis in competition, we get to understand how markets are changing. how things consolidate. We get to think about the things and explore the ideas that we might not have ever thought about. And that's what we're packaging up, and helping people really understand how to get to market. When they get to market, they're de-risked. And that's, the big thing for people that are not accepted into or a fit for these entrepreneurship accelerator programs. Um, Most entrepreneurs are self-funded. 77% of entrepreneurs are self-funded. So if you're going to be a self-funded entrepreneur, you better understand how you're managing your risk. And the best way to do that is to go through a program, go through a process where you really thought about all the things, without being, taking, a year to do it. Maybe you need a year to think about, how am I going to save the money to do what I want to do? There's lots of reasons people start businesses at various times, but really to be more thoughtful, a bit more cautious about something you jump into as building a business is a pretty serious thing.
Absolutely. And that's my next question is about where you see the industry going over the next several years. So, and I'm curious because a lot of people, especially those self starters, we might have a great idea and we just go, oh, let's run, go do it. We just jump down that rabbit
Yeah.
hole. But how are you seeing that your industry changing over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think the startup industry is going to have a bit of a reckoning. And I say this because, there's a number of just kind of, there's a spectrum out there of, you've got franchise models and small business that always be small, and then other kinds of businesses that are, venture scale type companies. And so there's a big spectrum. We talk about business, and so I want to focus specifically on businesses that are, at scale kinds of businesses. Um, Founders now have more opportunity than they ever have to do more with less. And that is a very distinct advantage for founders that are starting companies now. And we like to call these companies pufferfish companies. You can look bigger than your actual size. You can do a lot with very limited resources, because AI can take us really, really far. And it's good and it's bad. It's good to be, lean and nimble and be able to make decisions and not have, you know, tons of people with opinions around you, and to really have the depth of knowledge that you need, without a lot of bloat and overhead in your company. There's a lot of advantage to that. At the same time, we're not saying that advisory and expertise isn't required by actual people, because there's a place for that too. But finding that right balance, and being a bit conservative about how you spend money, how you spend equity, which is very expensive, you know, for founders to hand out equity like candy. We don't recommend it. Um, there's a way for people to um, really be very thoughtful about what they're doing and why, and who's part of their companies, and be a bit more conservative. So I think that poses sort of a challenge for the current model, when the status quo has been, let's trade our equity for advisory, and let's have a cap table with like 40 people on it, and we get to market, we're uninvestable. Those kinds of problems happen quite a lot for startup companies. Unintended consequences of help, that happens quite a lot. And even getting the wrong people involved in your company early on can be devastating early in the early stages. So what I think is going to change a lot about this industry is founders are going to become much more independent. They're going to go further faster with a lot less. And, there's a bit of a balance here that's shifting, because, you don't need millions of dollars um, to build certain capabilities. There's some industries we absolutely need tons and tons of investment. But there's other industries we really don't to start up. And so I think that's founders not having to raise as much money, bootstrappers who can get to market and still own 90% of their company, whatever that looks like. And that becomes really attractive for building, uh, very sustainable kind of business and generational wealth in a way that, if you raise tons of money and you exit with, after you pay everybody and everybody pays themselves first, you put 10 years in and maybe not get what get back out of it what you thought you might have. And I hear these stories quite a lot from founders who, exit and, they took money and investment from venture firms and, really ended up losing a lot of control over their dream.
Mm,
And that's the big consequence, and it's hard. I mean, there's no right decision, for any of this. We, consternate quite a lot. Do we raise money? Do we, do this on our own? What do we do? And there's always gonna be trade-offs. There's no right answer. But I do think that that's gonna put a bit of, interesting pressure on an industry that's always operated the same way, with founders at a disadvantage in some ways. I think there's a new opportunity for founders to be in a bit more control over their destiny.
fascinating. And our audience here for this particular podcast is women, and our purpose is literally to help women see that they can step out of their traditional comfort zone and be and do and all of the things that they want to do, that they dream of, in spite of obstacles and such. So I think
Mhm.
just hearing about this opportunity that they have, if they have the vision, there are the resources out there that can help them vet the business and figure out
Mhm.
how to get it started. But I'd love at this point for you to share a personal story with us, or professional, either way. But what's the biggest challenge that you've faced thus far in your life, and how is that shaping the way that you're doing business today?
Well, I've had a lot of challenges, Donna. It's like
Most
it's
of
a
us have, even if we don't want to
it's a
admit it, right?
it's a it's a bit of a wild toad ride life. But I think, you know, I think of challenges in terms of seasons. The challenge that you have when you're in your 20s are different than your 30s and 40s and, you know, that kind of thing, right? So I think about the seasons of, when had, young kids. My kids aren't young anymore. And, recently a season when I've been a caregiver to my dad. He's 92 years old. My mom passed from cancer 15 years ago, and I happened to be on an international assignment living in Turkey. And, there's a lot of seasons that you go through, job loss and job gain and being part of a toxic culture. And there's all kinds of challenges that people deal with. And, you know, I think that any one of those things is enough. And then you put them all together and it's like, that's a lot of stuff. And encourage everybody to not think that way. But you look back, it's like, wow, that's really a lot of things to have gone through. And the way I think about things, there's no way that I could be building a company without all those experiences because I just don't get rattled.
Right. And I love how you rephrase just the challenge more as a season.
Hmm.
It's kind of like having failures. You could call a challenge a failure, but a failure is what you've got to do in order to learn, right? And
Yeah.
that's what we're doing when life presents us with whatever challenge. We're learning how to cope, how to deal, how to, what to do differently, all of those things. So I think, yeah, that's true. We've all been shaped by our experiences, and it's what we do with those experiences that make a difference.
I understand your audience is people that are going through divorce. Is that correct? Did I
Yeah,
understand that right?
some of them are, right. Mhm.
Yeah. So that can be really, really difficult, period. And I think it's very important. And this is true of going through something like that or, you know, separating from a company or just deciding to kind of figure out, what's my responsibility versus what's not my responsibility. And this is my own growing up is to make sure that I'm not taking on the failure of other people. That's yours. That's not my responsibility. I know what part I did and my part of the responsibility, and to not mix those things together. And women oftentimes take on everybody's responsibility and everybody's failure. And it's important to not do that. We've got enough. And, on the point of, how to move forward, how to decide what to do, and how to grow from all that, you can't grow at all if you're not uncomfortable and on the edge of your own life. There's no way. It's actually the spiritual path, and if anybody knew how hard it was, they wouldn't go on it. It's a very, very difficult thing to grow and to learn and to become comfortable in your own skin, so to speak, and to stop, doing the things that people are asking you to do that makes them happy, right? It's like that's the power center that women can find, but it is very hard. It can be very hard. Maybe for some it's not. For me, it's been a journey.
Mhm. And that's a good life. That's a good life when you've been on that journey. Well, let me ask you, if you could have lunch with one person, anybody living or deceased, who would you choose to have lunch with and why?
I think I'd like to have lunch with my dad again.
Mm.
I think for people that, their parents, we get a couple if we're lucky, and it goes fast. And to cherish the time, I feel pretty lucky that I got to spend a lot of time with my dad. He was 92 and he passed in February,
Mm.
and he lived with me and my husband, and we had a lot of fun together. And he would sit out back, and the chickens would come and sit by him as he's reading his books, and we gardened and you know doing the roses every Saturday, and him getting to hear me jabber on about my company and the rest of it. So really good time that we had together. We were really good friends.
That's awesome. And for anybody that has lost a parent, I know they can relate. And if you haven't, I think the words of wisdom that Elizabeth has shared with you that you may or may not have caught is don't waste any time. We've got to appreciate people while they're here. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And, even my mom, when she passed 15 years ago, I felt like I was too young to have lost my mom then. But my parents were much older. I was born into a family where everyone was older. So, even then I knew it's like I'm not going to get this time back with my mom. I'm very intentional about, taking the moments you can when you have them, and to do the very best you can by, your family if that's available to you. And for some, it's not for some reasons, but yeah, no time wasted.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I certainly appreciate it. And I would love for you to also share with our audience the best way they can reach out to you to learn more about how you might help them.
Mm. So you can get a hold of me at hello at startstack.ai, and there's no C in StartStack.
And you can see it on her hat, right? There
Yeah,
you go.
can
There's
see
the
on my
spelling.
hat, right? And so we don't have to brush our hair. We just stick it all in a hat. Find us on our website as well. And you can find me on LinkedIn. And the way that we can help companies, we have a lot of our operational marketing services that we do for companies that are in growth. We get to know our companies really well. Our companies tend to be very, kind of technically, and also companies that are in the idea phase. We'll have a platform for those companies in the next, 3-4 months, and really like to have some of those companies that are in the idea space reach out to us and sign up for our waiting list and that kind of thing.
Sounds awesome. So lots of good things coming, especially for those of you with the entrepreneurial spirit and great ideas. So thank you so much, Elizabeth, for being our guest today. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Donna.
You're welcome. I hope today's conversation left you feeling inspired, informed, and ready to take the next step in your financial journey. Remember, building wealth isn't just about money, it's also about creating a life that aligns with your goals and values. If you found this episode valuable, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with the women in your life who deserve financial empowerment too. Until next time, stay confident, stay empowered, and keep building the life you desire.